Welcome to CISO's Insiders podcast, powered by GRC Consulting. In this podcast, we'll be interviewing leading CISOs and security leaders in the industry for light, eye-level conversations. Here, they share advice and tips, talk about their biggest accomplishments and failures, favorite drinks, key influencers, and much more. We encourage you to walk away with at least one insight that will help you better yourself or your business. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more content, please check us out on social media.
Welcome, everybody. Today I'm meeting with Eduardo Ortiz Romeu. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And Eduardo, I know you've been in the industry of cybersecurity for at least, I think more than a decade. I would guess around 15 years now. I think I know you had some experience in the academia, and you had some experience with working with large companies as a security architecture manager. I know you've served on a couple of boards. Maybe if you, and I know right now that you're the global head of cybersecurity at a company called Techtronic Industries, TTI. So if you can move in, introduce yourself, that would be excellent.
Thanks a lot, Ben, for having me here, and I'm glad to share this insight with you. Not that I'm counting on the time, but it's been 24 years doing cyber. I mean, I have my in-betweens with my own business, but I never really left the cybersecurity aspect of it. And we can talk about that later. But yeah, it's been 24 years. This past July, I still remember my first day officially into a big company. But a lot has happened since the 90s and the internet bubble up to what we're doing now. So I'm super happy to be here and more than willing to share my experience throughout these 20 some years.
Thank you, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you taking some time and carving a portion of your calendar for making this meeting happen today. And I know you mentioned, I think in a previous call, that you have 2 daughters, I think, or just 2 kids.
Yeah. So I'm married, and that's also 22 years in this case. And I have 2 girls, one senior in high school, which is already on the process of college hunting. And the other one, it's a sophomore. Both super swimmers. They love to swim, and they keep me extremely busy. But that's probably the part of my day that I like the most.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you about that. And you already answered one of my icebreaker questions, which was, what's your marital status? But if you're willing to share the other one, the answer to the other one, which is, what's your favorite drink?
I have, in that case, I have 2, one for the morning and one for at night. Coffee. I've been a coffee drinker probably since I was 5 years old. My grandma used to give me coffee with a lot of milk and sugar.
Really?
And
5?
Yeah,
wow, that's hardcore.
it was. Yeah, I remember spending time in summertime in her apartment, and she would give us mostly milk and sugar with some coffee. But kind of like I've been drinking it for a long time. And then single malt. I know you're a single malt lover, so yeah. I like all regions, depending on the day. Mostly it's Bayside nowadays. Of course I started with Highlands, and when as an introductory single malt phase. But I do love a lot of Isleys with my brother-in-law. He's a Islay crazy guy, so I do love the 3 regions. And lowlands, kind of like it's a little bit of a mix, but focus on those 3 regions. Single malts are my choice to go.
Got it. Well, I mean, yeah, as long, and I'm assuming coffee is the morning drink and single malt is the evening drink. Otherwise, but yeah, anyway, I'm not judging whatever the answer is. Yeah. So thank you again. And I think, as I mentioned before, the purpose of this podcast is basically to share some experience and educate the listeners out there, and providing some insights, some nuggets of information that would potentially benefit anyone out there who's been having a challenge, or who's looking into doing something, either something else or into expanding their own cybersecurity career. And for that, I'll just run through, a series of like questions, and this will be, basically an eye-level conversation. So just feel free to, feel at ease. I'm not going to grill you. I'm not going to ask you anything in particular about your company. That's not what I'm interested in. And I'm interested in, your journey and your path to where you are right now. And with that, I guess we can get started. If there's one thing you wish you had known before you began your career, what would that be?
Oh, wow. Okay. So, looking back, uh, and I kind of like fall into this probably after my first pause in cybersecurity was to learn the business side of this entire security equation. When I started in the 90s, it was extremely technical. Everything, there were no CISOs, for example. There were no, you get a manager, but that was about it. Everything funnels through the CIO at that time. Um, so the business come first. It's something that I learned when I had my own business, and kind of like helped me shift through my second life in cybersecurity. That IT and security usually are second place to the business. So learning to think and come up with solutions that will enhance the business, and most of the time are generated from the end users themselves, will have saved me a lot of headaches during probably the first 10 to 15 years of my career, because when I started, that technical mentality was ingrained, and it took me a while to get out to the business side.
Yeah, and I like what you said about business comes first, but one can argue these days that IT and cybersecurity are so ingrained into the business, and sometimes you can't really do business without having a good enough foundation and solution, especially now with cloud environments, and everything is like could be built in a second, but then you need to make sure that it's secure because otherwise you'll go out of business. So I really feel that maybe for the younger companies out there, I think really cybersecurity, IT, and business go in hand in hand. And obviously, you need to make sure that it's all very safe and secure for you to be able to do business, because obviously once you start doing business, you want to, stay in business.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, well, thanks for that. What would you say your biggest failure was?
Um, in cyber, this might not be cyber related, but I, I looking back now, is not knowing much about finance at a younger stage in my career. Like, I wanted to push solutions. No, but this is the right solution because this is what is going to reduce the risk this much. But in reality, the business, it goes back to the business. We were talking different languages, and it applies not only to cyber, but also in the personal side. Like, for example, it's an advice for a lot of listeners out there. I did not take my retirement planning seriously in my 20s, right? And looking back now, I regret not having that knowledge at that age. And I think in general, and I try to tell this to my different teams, is knowing finance will help you at any stage of your life, in both personal and business related. I think it took me a while, and I'm still reading finance books at this day just to learn more. I think I was very technical and forgot about that aspect of life. I think for me, I see it as a failure because right now it will have saved me so much time and headaches, and how to organize, get ready for college, get ready for a lot of different things in life, even retirement, right? So I think not really cyber related. It applies a little bit, but it's more in life. I try to do that now with my daughters.
Okay, got it. Yeah, definitely, it's a good point that you're making. And what would you say your biggest accomplishment was then?
So if I had to relate it to cyber, it will be, my first main project, which was deploying VPN technology back in 1999, right? We were in this company, we were ahead of the game, and I had to deploy VPN when it was triple des IPsec, the client, and it was not SSL VPN. It was, it's a total different architecture, more technical, but that really got me extremely into security, like into the weeds, right? Like learning how to dissect stacks and basically analyze protocols, and I think that really, and that project was a success. Like for Y2K, we were people working from home remotely at that time, so it was really what kind of like, okay, I can do this, I can take on other challenges. From a personal side, I think, and this, I always go back to this, raising my two daughters to be good human beings, right? I think we need more of compassion and responsible, dedicated to their passion, whatever it is, and having that discipline in life. Um, I would say, along that line, there's some examples that I try to inspire them. It's like, hey, I was able to complete my master's degree when I was at Purdue University under full scholarship while teaching at Purdue, and growing up, I was always under a negative mentality that I will not be able to accomplish much, right? Until one professor at Purdue changed that mindset for me and made me realize that everyone is capable of accomplishing their goals and discipline. So with discipline and determination at that point. So it really, that for me was those two events, well, three events, were like the biggest accomplishments that I still remember deep in my heart when a question like this comes up.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And the cybersecurity, as you know, is it's a booming industry. There's a huge shortage globally, I think, not just in the
Mhm.
US market. And people are really, I mean, some people are really anxious to get into that field. What advice can you give to someone who wants to pursue a career in cybersecurity and potentially, at some point become a chief information security officer or a global manager for that?
Well, I mean, nowadays it's very different from when I started, right? I think locally there's a lot more opportunities. I mean, people can start now. I always tell people, hey, you can start in GRC, regulations, compliance, governance, privacy, even security awareness, where you don't have to, be an expert technical person to start getting into the industry. Um, you can get technical in pen testing, finding a niche, etc. But in my early days, where firewalls and networking were the main areas of focus, right? Now they have so many entry options, which is great. It one thing is constant, as I mentioned earlier, know the business, but learn how your business generates revenue and how it can lose revenue. Learn about the business processes, finance, risk management, etc. Um, these are skills that will help you. But right now I have our cybersecurity administrator. He's an accounting major, right? And he's making that transition into cybersecurity. And it takes some time to learn. He's learning a lot of different areas, but I have a friend who asked me, recently, what can I do to get, because he loves the industry, how we are portrayed. And I told him, hey, you're really good managing projects. You're really good why don't you get into GRC and privacy and then start? And he's now writing policies and enforcing himself to learn in those areas, which are a great need. A lot of people think, oh, pen testing or application security or networking. Well, there's a lot of different areas. Um, I always say, look for those areas that might be a niche, but there's a big need as well. And luckily, this generation have a lot more options to get into cyber that are not strictly programming or networking or configuring a firewall or knowing Linux, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. But let me just ask you a follow-up question on that. And this is not a right or wrong answer, obviously. But like, let's say someone is geared towards at some point becoming, the chief information security officer of a company. Would you, like, when you talk to them and maybe mentor them, would you recommend that they start with, as you mentioned, the GRC, or would you recommend anything else in particular? If this is their end goal, would it still be GRC, or would it be like whatever application security or SOC or whatever other section?
Uh, that's a good follow-up. I think that in this case, people have to start playing to their advantages, right? I'll give you my own example. I'm not a good developer. I never liked coding. One thing I said, I'm never going to do application security because I don't like it, right? Um, but then I picked the areas that I wanted to focus. In my case, with networking, firewalls, servers. So depending on their area of interest, I think you can. I know guys that are attorneys that are really good CISOs right now. Um, I know, one of my close friends is an amazing developer, and he's a great CISO. I mean, he learned a lot about all the infrastructure, and he's really good at networking, routing. I mean, um, uh, endpoint security, you name it. But but he's been here, for close to 25 to 30 years. He's can still go head to head with the young generation, right? It depends on on their. I know some of them that are really business oriented. That's where the GRC privacy area, will help them. Risk management is an area that I never, growing up, in this field, never really paying attention to it until probably like 10 years ago, right? As I evolve in my career. So it depends on where they're coming in. My friend that asked me recently, GRC privacy, because he has probably 15 years of experience, so he can bring a lot into an organization with that profile versus somebody that is in their 20s trying to break in. There might be different areas. So I think it depends on where they are coming in at the
Hmm.
time, right?
Yeah, yeah, and just from my personal vantage point, I would also say that that's one, and the other one is probably the type of organization that they will end up working for. There's a huge difference if you work for a development heavy oriented organization as opposed to like a more traditional organization, as opposed to whatever, like a company that runs data centers. So I think that would also play a part. But yeah, I mean, I like that answer of, play to your advantages and capitalize on what it is that you're good with doing, and where your passion lies.
Hmm.
Thanks. And talking about, I always like to get the vantage point of the people I'm talking with around the role of the CISO in organization where the CISO is actually a part of the IT organizations. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you have any like pros and cons that you can mention here? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So I feel that the CIO and the CISO need each other, right? It has come to that point. And it has kind of like always been, but the CIO has been there for the longer time. CISOs are, I always had a CIO since the 90s. In the same company that I was working in the 90s that they called me back. And this is, you know, a 30 some year old company. Their first CISO started in 2012, and we were doing heavy security for a lot of different companies. So for me, I was thinking about it the other day. I was like, wow, even though we were doing a lot of security for a lot of customers, we never really had a CISO until way late into the game, right? Um, I think they need each other. We need both the CIO and the CISO need to help the organization by working together. I do believe the CISOs should not be reporting to the CIO and vice versa. I believe that they should be parallel. The goals, basically, I mean, the goals of each other. Every position have different goals, and in this case, they're very different. There will be a conflict of interest if the CIO is pushing their agenda without taking the CISO's input in some cases, right? I have seen that before. Um, but you take the last 2 years. You might have the CIO say, "Hey, we need to enable remote workers," and the CIO wanted to do it as fast as the business demanded, but the CISO needed to make sure the risk associated were under a level that was documented, right, and accepted by the business. So I remember there was a lot of, "Hey, we need to do this faster," and the CISO was like, "Well, let's make sure everything is in place. These are very general, but I was reading a survey from McKinsey the other day that reported that organizations' digital transformation has accelerated. I think something like during the pandemic, 7 or 8 years, right? Like in 2021, which CIOs are really pushing that digital transformation. CISOs are being known to kind of like, hey, let's make sure that we're doing this safety, security, with security in mind. So it's one of those things where we really need to work together and be super ingrained. But they need to report. If they report to
Hmm.
whoever they report, separate. When I see CISOs reporting to CIOs, there's always the agenda kind of like it doesn't get completed.
Yeah, I agree. And as someone who's been in this industry for, I think you mentioned 24 years, for a while, as you say, what are the best resources that have helped you along the way in terms of, learning, educating yourself, or, just getting ahead in the game?
If I look now, I think networking, among peers, right? It's something that has been done. In my case, probably I put more emphasis in the last 6 or 7 years. But having other CISOs, managers, even analysts, even my VAR that I trust, and we have it's a trusted advisor at this point, allows me to analyze problems from very different angles and perspectives, right? Like we before COVID, and we do it every now and then now, but we used to go once a month, a few CISOs from South Florida, just to have lunch, and we were talk about all the issues that we have, and I gain a lot of insights. Like, oh, I never thought about it to implement it that way. Even talking about policies, right? Like going to the one-page policies for the users versus the legal 4 or 5 page that nobody reads, or examples that were simple, but really that networking, I think it provides a lot of value because these are people suffering from your same pain points, and they're thinking in a total different way in their organization, right? The other one, it's reading. I mean, I think reading about the latest developments or even listening to podcasts like this one, right? Like, I hope some your listeners get something new out of this conversation today. But there's so many topic specific podcasts nowadays that you can consume and stay up to date. Sometimes I'm doing the dishes at home and I'm listening to a podcast, right? Because I'm by myself. I'm saying, oh, let me 20-30 minute period, and I learned something new. So I think networking and keeping up to date with podcasts, newsletters, reading. I'm reading try to read a few books at the same time. The biggest problem is I never really finish them all, but I read specific topics or specific chapters of the security books that I get. So
Hmm. Okay, so a lot of self-learning and a lot of networking. Did you have like a local networking group of CISOs in your area in Florida?
yeah, we I don't know if I can mention any organizations here, but we do through Evanta, for example. They do have events on a year, throughout the year that really allows you to connect with different CISOs from the area. Um, those are 2 or 3 key events that I try not to miss because they're really, you catch up with people nowadays, they're your friends. But our VAR even put one that those lunches, and they're really helpful in our, we were actually look forward to do those lunches on one Friday a month, right? Um, ISACA, I am a CISM. I try to attend those meetings. I don't go as often as I can, but or if I would like to attend. But getting out there, it really helps because even for the people that are starting in the industry, you establish connections, and when they need somebody, oh, I remember this guy, and it opens a lot of different avenues besides the knowledge, right?
Hmm. Okay, thank you. Um, Now, what would you say about common myths in our profession that you can debunk?
Oh, this one happened yesterday, but that's what I'm laughing. But it happens all the time, and it's when people ask me, what do I do, and once I tell them, and say almost everyone it say, oh, so are you a hacker? And I always say yes, right? But I explained to them that what media and pop culture are portraying have confused the term with someone who is doing bad things, right? Unethical, with the chances of doing prison time and all these bad guys, if they get caught, right? Those are, I always explain, those are threat actors. They're criminals. They're not hackers. And I always go back to the definition. A hacker is someone who uses computers, networking, or any other, knowledge that they have or skill to fix and overcome, any technical problem, right? In reality, the way I see it, and if you go in LinkedIn or these other social networks, there's a big divide. Hackers are the good guys. You get your black hat, white hat, gray hat, and you start explaining that to people, and like, oh my god, I didn't know. A simple question turns into a whole cultural thing. But I always try to emphasize that because people always say that's the first question. Oh, so you're a hacker, and say, well, I'm more on the executive side now, but I still play and tinker with things, and in order to help fix. So that's probably the one common myth across my career that it keeps popping up. Reason being, my daughter asked me last night. It's like, hey, you think you could hack into the school system for a survey that they're doing? And say, what are they using? Well, they're using Google Docs. And I say, yeah, probably you could. Okay, how? It's like, no, you're not going to do that, right? You use your talents for doing good things. You get caught, you're going to get in trouble. That's why I was laughing, because they asked me that question last night.
Yeah, I keep being asked for similar things by my kids, and I keep explaining to them that I'm not the one who's doing those tests, and I can't really do it, and I won't do it, and it's actually illegal, so
Exactly.
they shouldn't even think about it. But anyway, um, so in your opinion, and with the transition that we're seeing for the past, I would say 3 years, with transitioning even more so into the cloud, into a hybrid slash remote environment. What would you say are the main concerns that CISOs nowadays have, like in general, not specifically in your company?
I think in general, and even talking to other CISOs, is the growing attack surface, right? And not knowing what your inventory really is at the moment, and you can dissect it with all the frameworks. No matter how any cybersecurity framework, the CIS controls, they start with identification and inventory of hardware, software, your systems, but not a lot of companies have this, right? And in the last, since the pandemic, my daughters were connecting with their Chromebook, and my wife was connecting with her Mac, and and those were owned by us. They're not controlled. So, I was always asking, hey, did they install an endpoint? So what is that? Okay, we need to make sure that you're not causing anything on, because I'm not monitoring everything that they're doing. So I think, and we have seen it in our company where that growing attack surface kind of like got a little bit out of control, and now with, I think, OT coming into place, and there's a lot of IoTs within the OT environment, or building management systems that are conflicting in the network. And I think not knowing that, it's one of the main concerns from what I have heard. Supply chain attacks, and third party risks is another one that, due to the like I said yes before, the that acceleration in the digitalization that took place in the last few years, have increased that risk, right? And the list that to many companies, most of the time, is the undocumented, engagement that they have with this vendor, and nobody knew about it. We have been victims of that too. So I, I will summarize it in those two, based on what happens in the last 2 years. So.
Yeah. And, talking about shifting gears and talking a bit about the role of a CISO going forward. And I know you mentioned that at the beginning of our call that this is mostly a business function nowadays. But in your opinion, what are the most important skills that CISOs nowadays should have?
Um, like I said, communicating the business value of cybersecurity and IT to other executives, and even directors and managers. I think we need to be able to present evidence-based facts in which almost everyone can agree on, the answer to what is the value that cybersecurity is put into the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to be one of those things. It goes hand in hand. Be a translator of our metrics into the business and how we impact that business portion. It can be HR, it can be sales, it can be operations, manufacturing, and get other executives to care, understand, and kind of like eliminate that very famous so what. It's security. We don't care about that. We care about the sales and the production. And be able to really articulate the trade-offs and decisions that the executives and stakeholders are facing at the moment, and provide an answer to kind of like go more into forget about our technical and KPI metrics that have been doing the heavy lifting for us, and more, instead of continuing to report numbers, we need to start driving action into the business. It's not as easy as it sounds, but that communication takes time. You really need to know what the other party is doing and what their goals, and listen first in order to make sure that you document the risk, they understand it, and it's a smooth transition into selling what you have to offer to the business.
Yeah, and you also mentioned before that when you started, being a CISO or being in information security was mostly around, securing firewalls, maybe hardening some devices and all that stuff. Looking into the future, like let's say 5 years, 10 years into the future, where do you think, like, looking back at what it used to be, looking at the present, what it is now, what do you think this position would look like in like 5 years from now?
The CISO position.
Yeah.
And this is something I have seen even in my case, and some of the people that I know, it become more of a business. Increase your business acumen, right? I keep going back to that because I run into some close friends that are coming up and say, hey man, they're not listening to me, and I say, okay, share that presentation with me. It's like, yeah, because you're talking a total different language. You have to learn the business language, and how you do that translation. It's that communication is very, very important to get your program across to the other executives, and educate them. Since we are in reality, we're the newest kids on the table, right? The CISO, it's still evolving that position. I think it's been demanded more. You have the SEC demanding more presence, the governments are demanding more presence, so it's building up. But if something that I have taken upon myself, it's to learn more about the business and the security side. I know, but how do we do that communication? I think we're finally heading into the right direction, and it has taken way too many years to get to this point. But seeing more CISOs at the board it's a very positive trend. We need to be able to talk the language, because if we don't get invited, it's because they don't understand us, and they're going to keep doing the same thing. I think that's a key factor into how successful this role is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, I agree. And in your opinion, I know we have already covered like what you think, like the domains you think CISO should be focused on. We've covered where this role is going. In your opinion, what will we see in this space next, in the cybersecurity space next?
What I have seen, not only our company, and remember, I have 6 different business units, and every business unit is like their own company in our case, right? But I've seen that across the board, and with other CISOs, it's more of a security vendor consolidation, right? And not only because of the financial aspect of it, but also because of a combination of that expanding attack surface, that increased number of vendors in the space. I mean, I think the amount of vendors and requests I get on a daily basis, it's out of control in my opinion, because you get so many people doing the same thing. It's like, oh, how do I trust who's doing what, right? But make it easier to fill those gaps that you were referring to at the beginning of acquiring the right talent and retaining the right talent. I think a lot of companies are doing that vendor consolidation in order to reduce those gaps and transitioning to as a service subscription models. It's something that we've been seeing trending. I think it's becoming more accepted, and the vendors are doing a good job on adapting to it. But overall, at the end, it's that vendor consolidation. If you base it on a framework, it's going to save you a lot of time, money, and you're going to have a better security posture, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've already, and a lot of vendors are consolidating themselves, right, with through acquisition mergers and acquisitions. Yeah. So I just had a couple more questions before we can wrap this episode up for today. One, just as a follow-up on my last question. What would you define as innovation in our space? Is it more along the lines of, like, as you mentioned, vendor consolidation, or is it more along the lines of whatever, like a new technology, new architecture, new offering, whatever you can think of?
So in my case, a game changer for my specific situation, it's we having MDR, managed detection and response vendors, become more vendor agnostic, right? Before, you will go to company A and they say, yeah, we only support these EDRs, or we only support these different technologies. Nowadays, the provider that we have, through APIs and through different integrations, we can monitor pretty much I have 6 different business units that we're monitoring. All of them are different. Some of them have different EDRs, and some of them have different technologies fitting that telemetry into that main platform. So the previous provider, we were limited into what we could fit because they were like a box structure. Now, becoming more vendor agnostic in that sense, it allows me to really deploy a better service for I see my business units as my customers, but at the same time get better coverage and making sure that I'm not losing something. For me, in my case, that you have all these AI and all these other new terms that come along. Zero trust network architecture has been there, I think, since the 90s. The way I see it, it's network segmentation and live segmentation. But I think in my case, that's one of the biggest game changers, and it's actually taking off now, where I've been in quite a few meetings and people ask me, oh, what are you, I have these issues. Like, well, you need to find somebody that will fit as much as from the different technologies that you have, and you'll see a difference in how you put that incidents in that case together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. A couple questions about vendors. I know you mentioned, that the sheer amount of vendor requests and reach outs that you're getting a day is ridiculous. What, like, in your mind, what would be a good way for a vendor to reach out to you, if at all?
I can tell you what's the worst one first, which is
Yeah.
through I don't like cold calling, because I don't know who's on the other side, and they always pretend to be your friend. And, oh, Eduardo, how are you? It's like, no, like, who are you? And I think we're paranoid from being in this field. But I always say, and I actually sit down with some, and I can tell when somebody's new on the field and they're business development. I say, listen, find out by doing your own research. Even reach out to the VARs and find out which VAR I'm using. If I'm using 2 or 3, I know you have that direct communication. Find out if there's really a need in our program for your product, right? And even if you call me, ask me if I'm looking for a solution for whatever problem you are trying to solve. If I say no, then don't ask for a 15-minute call. So a lot of times I say no. I say, oh yeah, but let's set up a 15-minute call. And I say, well, I have already that area covered. So my advice will be, listen first, and then if we have to put a meeting together, I even have an agenda of a 30-minute meeting where the first 3 minutes are introductions. Then you go into the next 15 to 17 minutes are, explaining the solution. How is it different from the others in the same market? And I send them my agenda. I say, hey, if you stick to this agenda, I think we're going to get the best benefit, right? A quick demo of the solution if we need to, determine if it's a good fit for our company or for one of our business unit. I always ask to bring budget figures of approximate cost based on scenarios, because that would really, if the outcomes are good and there's alignment, you know, then we can discuss timelines, a possible POC. If they're not alignment, I tell them, hey, listen, it'd be, good to learn about the product, but this doesn't fit our needs because of XYZ. And I try to be as blank as possible with my vendors in order to save them time and my time, right? I think doing a little bit of research and listening, it pays them dividends. The people that listen to me, I say, okay, we're now establishing trust, and it's sometimes they want to get that 15-minute call without knowing if I really need the product, which is most of the time, right?
Okay.
That would be my advice.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm just thinking because I've been hearing that a lot lately. But what is it that you are looking for in a vendor? Maybe you can talk about a use case without mentioning any names, or unless you want to. I mean, I don't mind.
No, that, like I said, that they listen before selling. I think, and I even expressed this to our bar, which we have a really good relationship. And the new guys, I say, listen, when you sit down, listen. That should be 80% of your conversation. Listening to your customer, listening to their pain points. Ask very key questions that will bring you a lot of information. And because really in this industry, and it's not only my opinion, a lot of people I know, it's like you really need to be able to trust them before you do any business, right? And that's the way I see it. When the vendor is not listening to you, then you know that they don't have the best interest on your behalf, right? And there's no trust from my side. But believe it or not, I see a lot where I say, no, I just said this, and they keep going with their agenda. And I say, let's step back. This is what I just explained to you. Do you think you can solve that problem for me? And they keep deviating to another agenda. And I was like, okay, well, I don't think we're talking the same language, and kind of like, that was your choice. Let's move on. But I think listening, and which is something I'm still learning myself a lot of times, it's listening before selling. It really gonna help them to even I'm not gonna mention names, but I have vendors that I met their sales rep, and very nice guy. We established trust. It was not a fit for us. They moved to another company. They reached out to me. I already know them. Now it's a fit. It's an easy sell because I already have that relationship with and in this industry they move around a lot. So it's really establishing that trust where if they listen and they know what your pain points are, they can customize their solutions in a better way. I even have vendors that say, no, I'm not the right one for you. You should look at this product. That vendor for me gave me a lot of value. I say, I'm going to keep you in mind because what you did, you don't see it very often. And there's only a few that I have encountered like that. But for me, those are through salespeople. It's like, okay, I'm not going to be able to solve it the way you want it, but these other people, which might be their competitors, they're going to be in a better position. Not everyone does that, but I know that person has the best interest on my behalf, right?
Got it. Well, before we wrap this up, can you mention any other people that were influential to you throughout your journey, mentors, colleagues, friends that you wanted to mention?
I always, and my first boss ever, his name is Art Penn. I'll probably, send him a copy of this podcast because I'm mentioning him. But he was an amazing leader and built an amazing team environment, back in the 90s. I did learn a lot from him. Even his boss, which passed away years ago, but Tracy Sean. I mean, who I remember. I'm going back in memory lane. those two mentors early in my career were really good. I mean, I always try to look up to people that I know versus, some fictitious, influencer or whatever, however you want to call it these days. It's like, okay, these people really made a difference in and they trust me, right? When I was starting. So, another ones that, people take for granted is my core group of friends. They're people that I look up to in many different aspects of not only business but mostly in the life skills that that no school degree or experience will ever teach you. And I think you always have to we have a core group of people that I look up to. We get together a lot, but every time we get together we learn, even if it's to get try a new single malt or talk about any they're in total different business, but I learned so much from what their experiences are, and they're mostly successful people. And I always say you have to up your friends, and it really motivates me to be a better person, even as a father. Like we always share all those experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. What's the best way to connect with you then online?
I mean, I don't mind via my bar. It's a lot of companies come through my bar because I have really good relationship with them, and the trust is there. But LinkedIn is not a bad one as long as the one thing about LinkedIn is like you get a request and then like 2 minutes later, then let's meet for 15 minutes. Like, okay, who are you? I don't even know even what they do, or. So sometimes they do that jump right away. I have relationships on LinkedIn that have led to a business relationship because they took their time. It's like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you think you have a need, or if you can give me some feedback? And we start very soft, but it's like, oh, and it's like, can you help me with this, or looking for advice? Ended up being a business relationship down the road, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
putting time, but LinkedIn when they send that bot email, right, like 2 minutes after, it's like, okay, you kind of like stay away from those ones. The
Yeah.
best way not to connect is through cold calls. Because I don't know who's on the other side.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, thank you. And final question before we wrap this up for today. If money was never an issue, what would you do with your life?
oh wow. Um, my wife and friends always say that I'm always trying to help other people. And I do get a lot of satisfaction of helping people without expecting anything back. So I will set up a few organizations to help kids that are in foster homes or kids that have been victims of abuse or any type of trauma in their early life, and establish probably educational grants for students that have the potential to make a difference in life but are not able to do it given whatever specific circumstances they suffer when they were younger. So I always say, yeah, if I were to do something to make a difference, will be this, right? Like helping others that have been not fortunate enough to move on in life. So I I, I think that will be my best answer.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a very good answer. Thank you for that. And I think with that, I what's left for me is just to thank you for again taking some time out of your calendar and being very open and candid in our conversation today and sharing your insights and comments. I'm hoping your answers would resonate with a lot of our listeners. Yeah, and just thank you, Eduardo. Anything you wanted to add?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity. I really do hope that people. Well, this I don't know how many minutes have been we've been on it, but this conversation provides some value to your listeners, and do not be afraid to reach out to me through LinkedIn. I'm always available. So thanks very much for your time and for putting the podcast together. It every little bit of knowledge and help in this industry will help the younger generation. So I'm glad to do it.
Yeah,
Appreciate your invite.
yeah, I appreciate your taking that. Thank you again. See you later.
See, okay, nice.